The story opens with the snow gently blanketing the world outside, a serene yet cold reminder of the season's grip. Winter had always been a bittersweet time for me. 2 years ago, during a similarly frigid December, I lost my husband, Mark. His unexpected stroke had left me a widow, and my life a maze of quiet echoes and half-filled memories. Our son, Ethan, had stepped up in ways I could never have asked for. He became my anchor, the one constant in my sea of grief. That particular morning began like many others since Mark's passing. I brewed tea, its warmth a meager comfort against the chill that even our central heating couldn't completely chase away. I was about to prepare breakfast when a sudden wave of dizziness hit me, sharp and disorienting. My knees buckled and the world tilted. The next thing I remember was the cold, sterile hum of a hospital room. When I opened my eyes, the dim lighting stung. My throat was parched, my thoughts sluggish. Then I saw Ethan. He was sitting by my bedside, his expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. His hand reached out instinctively, gripping mine. "Mom," he said softly, his voice trembling just enough to betray his fear. "You scared me." "What happened?" My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "You had a microstroke," he explained, leaning forward. "They said it was caught in time, but you need to rest. No more pushing yourself." I tried to offer a weak smile. "I guess I needed a wake-up call." Ethan chuckled lightly, but his eyes glistened. "You're not allowed to scare me like that. Not again." For the next 2 days, I stayed in the hospital under observation. Ethan was my rock, as he always had been. He brought me books, my favorite herbal tea, and updates about the outside world. Each evening, he sat with me until the nurses nudged him to leave, a gentle but firm reminder that visiting hours had ended. On the 3rd night, as snow fell outside the hospital window, Ethan leaned in closer, his voice barely audible. "Mom, you need to start taking care of yourself." "Mean it." "I can't." He hesitated, his words hanging heavy in the air. "I can't lose you too." I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "You won't lose me, Ethan. I promise." But promises felt fragile against the weight of our shared loss. His presence, his devotion, filled me with both gratitude and an ache I couldn't name. I needed to be stronger, for him and for myself. After my discharge, Ethan was insistent that I not stay home alone. I resisted at first, not wanting to disrupt his life or impose, but he wouldn't hear it. "Mom," he said firmly, helping me into his car as though I were made of glass, "you're staying with me." End of discussion. His apartment wasn't far from the hospital, a cozy 1-bedroom that he'd kept tidy and inviting, though I knew he'd scrambled to prepare it for me. He had cleared his living room to make space for a comfortable reclining chair, ensuring I had somewhere to rest other than his bed. Despite my protests, he almost carried me inside, his hands steady and sure as they guided me to sit. "You don't have to do all this," I murmured, embarrassed by the fuss. "Stop," he said, kneeling in front of me. His voice was soft, but the resolve in his eyes left no room for argument. "You've always taken care of me. Let me do this, okay?" The sincerity in his words made my chest tighten. I nodded, unable to trust my voice, and reached out to squeeze his hand. His touch was warm, grounding. For the next few days, Ethan barely left my side. He cooked meals, simple but thoughtful, adjusting them to the bland, doctor-approved diet I now needed. He adjusted my pillows with meticulous care, checking in frequently to make sure I was comfortable. When I needed to move from room to room, he was there, his arm steadying me, his voice a calm reassurance. It was the little things that struck me most. The way he draped a blanket over my shoulders when I dozed off in the chair. How he brushed stray hair from my forehead as he checked my temperature. The way his hands lingered on mine a fraction longer than necessary when helping me drink water. The closeness between us, always strong, began to feel different, more profound. It wasn't just a son taking care of his mother. It was a connection I couldn't fully name, one that seemed to grow deeper with each passing day. One evening, the snow outside swirled thickly, muffling the city's usual hum. Ethan had made soup, rich, fragrant, and nourishing, and was tidying up in the kitchen while I rested on the couch. He had insisted on a small table nearby so I wouldn't have to reach for anything, arranging my tea, books, and even a vase with fresh daisies he'd brought home. As I watched him move about the kitchen, the light catching on his sharp cheekbones, I felt an overwhelming gratitude for him. He had grown into such a remarkable man. Mark would have been proud. When he returned to the living room, he knelt by the couch to adjust my blanket again, his expression full of quiet concern. "Are you warm enough, Mom?" I smiled, reaching out to brush my fingers through his dark hair, something I hadn't done since he was a child. "You're spoiling me." "You deserve it," he replied softly, his eyes meeting mine. The moment stretched between us, charged with a warmth that had nothing to do with the blankets or the fire in the hearth. I felt an ache in my chest, not pain but something bittersweet. He was no longer just my son, the boy I'd raised. He was a man now, one who carried himself with strength and care. His presence filled the empty spaces left behind by Mark's absence, and I wasn't sure if that comforted me or frightened me. The next day, I insisted on moving about more. Ethan was reluctant at first, hovering close as I shuffled from the living room to the kitchen, but I needed to prove to myself that I was still capable. "You're pushing yourself," he murmured, steadying me when I wobbled. "Because I have to," I replied, leaning into his solid frame. "I can't let this define me, Ethan. You're stubborn, you know that." His voice was exasperated but tinged with amusement. "I wonder where you get it from," I teased. Despite my small victories, my strength would wane quickly, leaving me to collapse into the recliner. Ethan would crouch beside me, his hands brushing mine as he whispered words of encouragement. His devotion was almost overwhelming, a constant reminder of how much he cared. One evening, as we sat together watching the snow drift lazily past the window, Ethan suddenly reached out, taking my hand in his. His thumb brushed over my knuckles in a way that was both soothing and intimate. "Mom," he began, his voice low and uncertain. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About how close we came to losing you." I turned to him, my heart aching at the raw vulnerability in his eyes. "You didn't lose me," I assured him. "I'm still here." "I know," he said quickly, "but it made me realize how much you mean to me. I don't ever want you to feel like you're alone, like you have to face everything by yourself." Tears stung my eyes. I squeezed his hand tightly, the words catching in my throat. Ethan shifted closer, his presence steady and grounding. "You've been my rock, Mom," he continued, "for as long as I can remember. Let me be that for you now." His words wrapped around me like a blanket, filling me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I leaned my head against his shoulder, letting myself relax into his strength. "You already are," I whispered. The snow outside fell heavier, shrouding the city in white, but inside the world felt warmer, safer. Ethan's arm rested around my shoulders, holding me close, and for the first time in a long while, I felt that I wasn't just surviving, I was healing. The days passed in a gentle rhythm, the snow outside our window providing a serene backdrop to my recovery. Ethan had returned to work but insisted on checking in regularly, often surprising me with calls during his lunch break or texts to see how I was feeling. When he came home in the evenings, his first stop was always me. "You're looking better today," he'd say, a warm smile lighting up his face. "Your color's coming back." "You always know just what to say," I teased, though his words lifted me in ways I couldn't fully express. One evening I was curled up in the recliner, a book in my lap, when he walked in with a small package in his hands. "What's that?" I asked, closing my book. "Something to help you relax," he said, holding it up. "A new meditation set. I thought we could try it together." I tilted my head, amused. "Meditation? Since when are you into that?" He shrugged, his smile sheepish. "I thought it might help you unwind. And maybe me too. Work's been a bit crazy." I couldn't help but laugh at his earnestness. "All right, Mr. Zen. Let's see what you've got. After dinner, Ethan set the mood in the living room, dimming the lights and lighting a lavender-scented candle from the meditation kit. He placed 2 yoga mats on the floor, though I joked about how ridiculous I'd look trying to sit cross-legged after everything that had happened. He waved me off, his smile reassuring. Just sit however you're comfortable, he said, helping me settle on the mat. The whole point is to relax. We started with deep breathing exercises, Ethan guiding me with a calm, steady voice. At first, I found it hard to focus, my mind wandering to the to-do lists and worries that never seemed to leave me. But his presence was grounding, his voice soothing as he walked me through the steps. Breathe in, he said, his own breaths audible and steady. Hold it. And let it out slowly. I followed his rhythm, the tension in my shoulders easing little by little. When I opened my eyes after a guided visualization, Ethan was watching me with a soft smile. Feel better, he asked. I nodded, surprised. Actually, yes. You're pretty good at this. He grinned, leaning back on his hands. Maybe I missed my calling. As we packed up the mats, Ethan glanced at me thoughtfully. He began, I learned a lot about pressure points and massage techniques when I was training for sports in high school. It might help with your tension. I raised an eyebrow. You're full of surprises tonight. I'm serious, he said, laughing. Let me give it a shot. Worst case, you tell me to stop. Something about the idea felt both relaxing and oddly intimate, but I agreed, curious to see if he was as skilled as he claimed. He brought a soft blanket and draped it over the recliner before helping me settle in. His hands were warm as they rested lightly on my shoulders, his touch careful and deliberate. Let me know if I press too hard, he said softly, his breath close to my ear. I nodded, my eyes fluttering shut as his fingers began to work on the knots in my shoulders. At first I felt self-conscious, unsure if I should be enjoying this so much. But Ethan's focus was undeniable, his hands moving with a surprising grace and strength. Each press and knead sent waves of relief through my aching muscles. You're really good at this, I murmured, my voice heavy with relaxation. He chuckled, his hands moving to my upper back. Told you. Years of practice. As the tension melted away, I found myself laughing at his jokes, silly anecdotes about his coworkers, and the exaggerated stories of his high school football days. He had always had a way of making me smile, but tonight felt different, like the world outside our little cocoon had faded away. By the time he finished, my body felt light, almost weightless. Ethan sat beside me on the floor, leaning his back against the couch as I stretched lazily in the recliner. You should do this professionally, I teased, my voice soft with lingering drowsiness. You'd make a fortune. Nah, he said, glancing up at me with a boyish grin. I'd rather save my talents for someone special. The way he said it made my breath catch for a moment. His words were innocent enough, but the way his eyes lingered on mine sent a flutter of warmth through me. I pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to my overly relaxed state. You've always been someone special, I replied, ruffling his hair. He laughed, leaning into my touch for a moment before catching my hand and holding it gently. I'm serious, Mom, he said, his tone quiet but firm. You mean everything to me. The sincerity in his words made my chest ache, but it was a good ache, one that reminded me how deeply he cared. I squeezed his hand, my thumb brushing lightly over his knuckles. And you mean everything to me, Ethan. We sat there for a while, the quiet hum of the heater filling the room as the snow continued to fall outside. It felt like the world had slowed down, leaving just the two of us in a bubble of warmth and connection. As I drifted off to sleep later that night, I couldn't shake the memory of the way Ethan had looked at me. His eyes filled with a depth of emotion that was both comforting and unsettling. Our bond was changing, growing stronger in ways I hadn't anticipated, and though part of me wondered where it might lead, I couldn't deny how much it meant to me. The snow outside thickened, blanketing the world in silence, but inside, the warmth between us felt like it could melt even the coldest winter night. The following morning, I woke up feeling refreshed, the tension in my shoulders completely gone from Ethan's thoughtful care the night before. The soft light of winter filtered through the curtains, illuminating the snow-covered landscape outside. I watched the flakes drift for a moment, feeling a rare calm settle over me. Ethan had done so much for me in these past weeks. I wanted to show my appreciation, something beyond words. As I shuffled into the kitchen and saw the fresh oysters we'd picked up during our last grocery trip, an idea took shape. Cooking was something I hadn't done much of since the microstroke, but the thought of preparing a special meal for Ethan filled me with a sense of purpose. He deserved it, after everything he'd done to support me. By the time Ethan returned home that evening, the apartment was filled with the savory aroma of oysters lightly broiled with garlic, butter, and herbs. A bottle of white wine sat chilled on the table, and I had even taken the effort to dress nicely, slipping into a soft sweater and a pair of earrings I hadn't worn in years. "Whoa," Ethan said, stepping inside and setting his bag down. He stopped short, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of the table. "What's all this?" "A thank you dinner," I said, turning to face him with a smile. "For everything you've done for me." Ethan's expression softened, a look of surprise and warmth crossing his face. "You didn't have to do all this, Mom." "I wanted to," I insisted, gesturing for him to sit. "Now come on. It's getting cold." He didn't need much convincing, and soon we were seated across from each other, the candles flickering softly between us. As he took his first bite, his eyes lit up, and a groan of approval escaped his lips. "This is amazing," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You've outdone yourself." I laughed, pleased with his reaction. It's been a while since I cooked like this. I wasn't sure I still had it in me. "You absolutely do," he said, pointing his fork at me. "This is the best meal I've had in, well, as long as I can remember." We spent the next hour eating and talking, our conversation flowing effortlessly. He shared stories from work, updates on his friends, and even a few childhood memories that had us both laughing. The wine added a pleasant warmth to the atmosphere, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for the ease and closeness between us. After dinner, Ethan stood and began clearing the plates before I could protest. "Sit," he said firmly. "You cook. I'll clean." I watched him move around the kitchen with practiced ease, the way his shoulders moved under his shirt, the gentle concentration on his face as he washed the dishes. Once he was finished, he returned to where I sat and leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and full of gratitude. That was perfect. The warmth of his lips lingered, and I felt my breath hitch. I looked up at him, surprised by the tenderness in his expression. "You're welcome," I murmured, my voice quieter than I'd intended. He sat down beside me, closer than usual, his gaze steady. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of the evening settling around us. Then Ethan exhaled, his hand running through his hair as if he were gathering courage. "Mom," he began, his tone hesitant but firm. "I've been meaning to tell you something." I tilted my head, curious. "What is it?" He looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with an earnest vulnerability that caught me off guard. "These past few weeks," he said, "have been intense. When I got the call about you being in the hospital, I thought..." He broke off, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "I thought I was going to lose you." I reached out instinctively, placing my hand over his. "But you didn't, Ethan. I'm here." He nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "No. But it scared me, Mom. It made me realize how much I depend on you. How much I care about you." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt my heart ache at the raw emotion in his eyes, the way his hand tightened around mine. "I've always known you were special," he continued, his voice quieter now. "But these past few weeks, being here with you, taking care of you, it's been different. I feel closer to you than I ever have, and it's made me think about things I didn't expect." I wasn't sure how to respond. His words filled me with a mix of emotions, gratitude, affection, and something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. I squeezed his hand gently, searching for the right thing to say. "You've always been my strength, Ethan," I said softly. "Even when you were little, you had this way of grounding me, of making me feel like I could handle anything. And now, seeing the man you've become..." I trailed off, my voice catching. Ethan looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. "I just want you to know how much you mean to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just as my mom, but as someone I deeply admire. Someone I want to protect, to take care of." Tears stung my eyes, and I reached up to cup his face, my thumb brushing lightly over his cheek. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. "You've grown into an incredible man, Ethan. And I'm so lucky to have you." For a moment we sat there in the quiet, the snow falling softly outside. The connection between us felt unbreakable, something more than words could capture. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine, and I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of his presence wash over me. In that moment, the world outside didn't matter. It was just us, bound by love, trust, and a closeness that felt as natural as the air we breathed.